Well, grand rising, and welcome to Elanda Monet's Motivational Moment. Before I start, I must do my what? Salutations. Abaragani. Assalamu alaikum. Ikaru. Now that I've done my salutations, let's get into the meat of the message for today. Today this is our last series, or our last talk about African American history before 1865. In this particular unit, we'll concentrate on the construction period, the impact and the legacy it had on America, and what made America great, and what did not make America great, and how African Americans have influenced many of today's things that we do, say, just of our environment, of our culture. So let's get started. Reconstruction, spanning from 1865 to 1877, marked a transformation period in America's history following the Civil War. The era was significantly This era saw significant political, economical, and social changes as the nation grappled with the reunification and the integrity of former enslaved individuals into society. Key events include the passage of the Constitutional Amendment granting citizenships and voting rights to African Americans, the establishment of the Freedmen's Bureau, and the rise of the African American political participation. However, resistance from white Southerners and the emergence of groups like KKK or the Ku Klux Klan challenged progress, ultimately leading to an era end with the Compromise of 1877. Now let's talk about the key events and timelines. Reconstruction began in 1865 after the Civil War and lasted until 1877. President Andrew Johnson implemented its own Reconstruction plan in 1865, which included pardoning former Confederates and returning confidential or confiscated lands to white Southerners. Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which granted citizenships to all persons born in the United States and prohibited discrimination based on race. The 14th Amendment, which ratified in 1868, granted citizenships to all persons born or nationalized in the United States, including former slaves. The 15th Amendment was ratified in 1870, prohibiting the denial of the right to vote based on color, race, or previous condition of servitude. The Freedmen's Bureau was established in 1865 to provide assistance to former slaves and poor whites in the South. They provided food, housing, medical aid, and education. They also helped in negotiating labor contracts between former slaves and landowners. The Ku Klux Klan was founded in 1865 by former Confederates to intimidate African Americans and white Republicans through violence and terror. Reconstruction ended in the Compromise of 1877, which resulted in the withdrawal of the federal troops from the South and to end the Republican control of Southern states' governments. Now, the major political changes. The Republican Party became the dominant political party in the South during the Reconstruction, as many former slaves and white Unionists joined the party. African American men gained the right to vote and hold political office at that time. African American men, women were not even in the inclusion. We didn't get our rights until later. Over 1,500 African American men held political office during Reconstruction at the local, state, and federal levels. Herman Reeves and Bianca K. Bruce became the first African American U.S. senators. Many southern states adopted new state constitutions that include provisions for public education, voting rights, and civil rights protections. The Democratic Party remained in control of the southern states' governments by the end of the Reconstruction through a combination of violence, intimidation, and fraud. Redeemer governments worked to roll back many of the gains made by African Americans through the Reconstruction. The Compromise of 1877 effectively ended Reconstruction and marked a shift toward a more conservative political climate in the South. The Supreme Court issued several decisions that limited the scope of the 14th and 15th Amendments and civil rights protections. Slaughterhouse cases versus Cruikshank, if that be the word. Now let's talk about the economical impact. The Southern economics was devastated by the Civil War, with most of its infractions, including railroads and factories, were destroyed. The abolishment of slavery transformed the Southern economy from one based on slave labor to one based on free labor. For many slaves becoming sharecroppers, renting land from the white owners in exchange for a share crop or a share portion of the crop. The crop lending system often led a cycle of debt and poverty for the African American farmer. The Southern economy remained primary agriculture with cotton as the main crop source. The Northern inventors and businessmen played a significant role in the industrial lives of the South Reconstruction. Textile mills and other factories were established in the South. Railroad construction expanded, connecting the South to the national markets. African Americans made some economical gains during the Reconstruction, including the establishment of black-owned businesses and acquired land. The Freeman Savings Bank was established to provide financial assistance or services to African Americans, but unfortunately failed due to mishandling and fraud. Economic inequalities persisted, with most wealth remaining concentrated in the hands of white Southerners. Now let's talk about social transformations. The abolishment of slavery led to significant changes in the South society and culture. Former slaves sought to reunite with family members who had been separated by slavery. Many former slaves changed their names or adopted new surnames. African Americans established their own culture, churches, schools, and social organizations separate from their white institution. The African Methodist Episcopal Church and the Baptist Church became independent institutions of African American community. Education became a priority for the African American community with the establishment of schools and colleges. Fisk University, Howard University. Education became the primary of the African American community, which established schools and universities. The interracial marriages and friendships or relationships became more common, challenging tradition, norms, and thoughts. The Ku Klux Klan and other white supremacist groups used violence and intimidation to maintain white social and political dominance, which they did use the police, which the police were a part of the KKK. Many of the KKK held predominantly roles in the community: doctors, lawyers, policemen, businessmen. So even though we were granted certain laws, there were still people there to try to keep us under. Now, lynching and other forms of racial violence were common during the Reconstruction and beyond. So just to let you know that just because there was not slavery, or slavery was no longer looked upon as a good thing, does not mean that they did not find another way to kill us off. The lost cause mythology emerged as a way of white Southerners to romanticize the Confederacy and justify the institution of slavery, meaning Black people loved to be, or their enslavement was good. They liked to be enslaved. They couldn't think. They couldn't do things for themselves. So enslavement was a way to help the African Americans through their whatever they're doing. Jim Crow laws and segregation became entrenched in Southern society by the end of the Reconstruction, limiting the social and economic opportunities for African Americans. Now let's talk about the African American experiences. African American experienced both opportunities and challenges through the Reconstruction. Many former slaves sought to exercise their newly found freedom by leaving plantations and seeking employment in the city or their own land. Some African Americans became successful businessmen, professionals, and politicians. Others struggled to find work and faced poverty and discrimination. Education was a top priority for many African Americans who sought it as a means of social and economical achievement. Thousands of African American children attended schools established by freedom bureaus and Northern aid societies. Literacy rates among African Americans dropped significantly during the Reconstruction. African Americans also sought to exercise their political rights by voting and running for office. African American voters often faced violence and intimidation from white supremacist groups. The Federal Freedmen Bureau provided important services to African Americans, including legal assistance, medical care, and food and clothing. Despite gains made during Reconstruction, African Americans continue to be faced with significant challenges, including poverty, discrimination, and violence. The Ku Klux Klan and other white supremacist groups target African Americans with beatings, lynchings, and other forms of terrorism. The Colfax Massacre in 1873 resulted in the death of over 100 Africans who were defending their rights to vote. The resistance and backlash. White Southerners resisted Reconstruction's efforts and the gaining of the civil rights movement for African Americans. The Ku Klux Klan and other white supremacy groups used violence and intimidation to maintain white society and political dominance. The Klan targeted African American leaders, white Republicans, and Northerners who supported the Reconstruction. The Memphis riots of 1866 and the New Orleans massacre of 1866 were examples of white mobs' violence against African Americans and their supporters. Southern Democrats remained control of the state government through combination of violence, intimidation, and fraud. The Redeemers worked to roll back many of the gains many of the African Americans obtained during Reconstruction. The Compromise of 1877 marked the end of Reconstruction and the withdrawal of the federal troops from the South. Okay? Now, many of the southern states passed black codes which restricted the rights and freedoms of African Americans. These laws limit the ability of African Americans to own property, enter into contracts, and testify in court against whites. The Supreme Court issued several decisions that led to the scope of the 15th and 14th Amendment and civil rights protections. The Slaughterhouse Clause in 1873 limited the scope of the 14th Amendment, providing the immunity clause. U.S. versus Closicott, I'm not sure if I said that right, but in 1876, limited the federal government's abilities to prosecute individuals for civil rights violations. The lost cause methodology emerged as a way for white supremacy to romanticize the Confederacy and justifies the institution of slavery. Now, what have been the long-term legacies? Now, Reconstruction has a significant impact on American society and politics, which continue to fall, which will continue on today. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment of the Constitution were important milestones for the struggles of civil rights. These amendments abolished slavery, gave citizenship to all persons born in the United States, and prohibit discrimination in voting based on race. However, the promises of these amendments were not fully realized by many decades due to resistance and backlash. The Civil Rights of 1866 and the Reconstruction Act of 1867 were important pieces of litigation that sought to protect the rights of African Americans. These laws led to the groundwork for future civil rights litigation in the 20th century. The Freedmen's Bureau provided important services to African Americans through the Reconstructions, including education, health care, and legal assistance. The Bureau worked hard to help establish a foundation for future efforts to improve the lives of African Americans. The rise of the Ku Klux Klan and other white supremacist groups during the Reconstruction had a lasting impact on American society. These groups used violence and intimidation to maintain their white social and political dominance and to limit the rights and opportunities for African Americans. The legacy of racial violence and terrorism continue to be felt in American society today. The failure of the Reconstruction to fully address issues of racial inequality and injustice have long-term consequences. Jim Crow laws and segregation became entrenched in American society, limiting the social and economical opportunities for African Americans for decades. The legacy of slavery and racism continue to shape African American or the American society and politics in the present day. Now, the debates and interpretations. Historians had debated and succeeded the failures of the Reconstruction, and it is important to American history. The Downing School in the early 20th century portrayed Reconstruction as a tragic era of corruption and misrule. This interpretation was influenced in Reconstruction, reshaping political opinion and justifying the defragment of African American or disenfranchisement of African Americans. However, later historians have changed their views and argue that Reconstruction was a noble but flawed attempt to create a move just for equality in our sociology or society. Some historians have emphasized the economics and political gains made by African Americans through the Reconstruction. Eric Fond's book, Reconstruction, Americans' Unfinished Revolution, argued that Reconstruction was a revolutionary period that transforms African society and politics. Other historians have focused on ways in which African Americans exercised agencies and resilience by Reconstructions, challenging the views of them as passive victims. Other historians have emphasized the limits and failures of the Reconstruction. C. James Woodworth's book, The Strange Career in Jim Crow, argues that Reconstructions failed to change the fundamental structures of white supremacy in the South. Some historians have argued that the failure of the Reconstruction to redistribute land and wealth to former slaves limited its ability to create lasting change. The legacy of Reconstruction continues to be debated in contemporary politics and societies. Some argue that the promise of Reconstructions remain unfulfilled and that the issues of social inequality and injustice persist in American society today. George Floyd, Lisa Bland, Sandra Bland, a lot of them, a lot of incidences. Others argue that reconstructions were a misguided attempt to impose federal power on the states that is failure to invade. The interpretation of the Reconstruction has important implications of how Americans understand the uses of race, Christianity, citizenship, and democracy in the present day. Now, if you look in the present day, you will see that a lot of stuff that we have, it was supposed to make things better, but it ended up making things worse and or making things unsuitable for us to move or accomplish our goals. So with that being said, never stop fighting. Never stop going after for what you know, what you believe, and how you believe in it. Make sure that if you're going to stand for something, stand on it 100%. Black-owned business. You guys really need to start supporting the black-owned business. And to my black-owned business owners, customer service is the key. If you do not have a product that will help the masses, then don't bring it out. So with that being said, guys, I've got to go. I love you, but God loves you more. Remember, I'll see you at the top because the bottom is way too crowded. Now, all of these talks and lessons can be found on my YouTube page, which is Elonda Monet Hatter, and that's ELONDAMONIAHATTER on YouTube. You can find these talks and other talks on my YouTube page, Instagram, Twitter as well. So with that being said, I got to go. Bye, guys.